Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are gonna talk about how adding this to your soft plastic baits can skyrocket your catch rates, right? One single toothpick can take your soft plastic game to the next level. So let's dive into how I use this to help me catch more bass. We'll see you out there. All right, everybody, so we're throwing it back old school with that one tip to help you out. Today, we're talking about how I use toothpicks as an addition to my soft plastic baits to help and improve their action underwater. Now, about 7 or 8 years ago, when the Ned rig first came out, people started getting bites from fish in all kinds of different water conditions, throwing that tiny Ned rig that stands up on the bottom. And the reason why the Ned rig gets bit is because there's a profile on the water, right, if you will, that looks like that on the bottom, and it stands straight up and down, and it shakes, and you can swim it, you can hop it, and it's unassuming. Well, it turns out they did a lot of studying, and bass are more likely to eat crawfish that are in a defensive position, but that don't have a claw or any claws, because it's seen as an easy meal or an easy way to target that crawfish, right? When it has its big pinchers out sometimes, bass are less likely to inhale that. But if they see that profile, that Ned rig on the bottom, they're far more likely to attack and eat that bait. Now, with that being said, a long time ago, back in the day, a lot of guys used to fish worms and big worms by adding toothpicks into the base of that bait to help it float in the water. Before all these new plastisols and all the baits that float and stuff like that, they used to add toothpicks. Now, here's the news flash. A lot of people have forgotten about that. A lot of people use positive buoyancy baits. They use a different lot of things, but without breaking the bank, you can get a box of toothpicks for like less than $1 at the store, right? And toothpicks are a great way to make your bait look different on the bottom. The first way that I use a toothpick is when I am fishing a shaky head with a finesse worm, right? This finesse worm is easy. You cut a piece of toothpick and you insert it in the tail, right? And here's that piece of toothpick, here's that tail, right? By inserting it in the tail of the bait and covering it like that, I am literally allowing that bait to sit on the bottom. As you can see in the underwater footage right here, that bait looks very, very, very responsive. It'll shimmy into place, and it's going to generate far more bites for you than when it is simply laying on the bottom, right? Now, how do I know what baits that I should do that with and baits that I shouldn't do that with? Tiny, tiny, tiny beaver style baits, I always, always, always am going to put a toothpick in those baits. And I do this because while these baits are kind of motionless or actionless, they have a nice gliding action. On the bottom, you're going to give this bait a different profile and a different look. What it looks like to me for most of these baits is a bluegill or a small bait fish feeding on the bottom. And when I'm fishing a do-nothing bait like a beaver, I really want that profile to look right. So the Dirty Sanchez rig, as we talked about in another video, I'll link it right here, is something that I always add a toothpick to. Now, the toothpick makes those baits stand up and give a lot more action. It also slows the fall. You can put a heavier head on there, but it's gonna slow the fall because it's positive buoyancy, right? So the first group of baits that I use that on are finesse worms and small creature baits, right? The next way that I use this is the Tokyo rig. Now, the Tokyo rig was created to present baits in heavy cover, but keep them off the bottom. Think of this as a small wire drop shot, right? And we already know the drop shot gets you a lot of bites, but the Tokyo rig is a way to present those baits in heavy cover, right? Punch it through mats, throw it in the slop, throw it in the weeds, and it keeps that bait off the bottom. Now, what I figured out when I'm fishing that Tokyo rig, most oftentimes I fish a 7-inch zoom finesse worm, or a trick worm. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my toothpick, here's a full-size toothpick, right? And I'm gonna cut the tip of that toothpick off, that tiny little piece right there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my worm, and you can see it on the trick worm really good. There is where you're gonna Texas rig that worm, but here you have a fatter tail section, right? I like to take that toothpick, insert it into this tail section, just like this. And what I do when I'm doing that is I'm gonna make that worm stick straight out from that bait, right? It's going to stay there, and as you insert this toothpick in, what you're doing is you're giving positive buoyancy to that tail section. Now, it's covered up in there, you can't see it, but when that worm's on the bottom, as you can see in the underwater video, that tail becomes way more lively and it wants to stand up. Now, this is going to be a different way to present baits, and I am all about that, right? The more I can modify and make my baits similar but different to what bass guys are throwing around me, the more bites that I'm going to get, right? So finesse worms, a great way to do it. Another thing that I like to do is rig flukes with the toothpick. Now, flukes on the toothpick tend to go more in the middle of the bait, right? So I'm gonna insert that toothpick in the middle of the body of the fluke, in this middle cavity here, and I'm gonna slide it up in there. And what I like to do with this is, one, I'm going to nose hook that fluke, and two, that fluke is going to ride far higher in the water column with positive buoyancy in there. It also adds additional weight that you can skip that bait. Now, I do this when bass are heavily fishing on the surface, or if I'm throwing that fluke on a free rig. That free rig with a weighted and unweighted fluke makes a lot of difference. It will spiral slowly, and then what you can do that's really cool with the fluke on a free rig is you can yo-yo it up and down, because as you pull up on the line, it's gonna pull that bait down to the weight, and as I give it slack, it's gonna go back up and rise. It's a great way to literally fish a fluke on beds, right? If they won't hit it like that, they'll hit it another way. Same thing with the tube, right? I like to insert a toothpick into the tube if I'm fishing it on that Tokyo rig, because it's going to have a more scintillating action when it's down there. And if I'm looking for aggressive action on a tube, maybe there's a little stain in the water, or I'm fishing smallmouth that are just fired up, that tube on a Tokyo rig is going to absolutely be a killer, right? The last way that I like to fish these are on crawbaits that I Nico rig, right? I want this chigger craw standing up off the bottom. I want these things flowing. I want those craws flapping as I hop it off of rocks. So I'm going to insert that toothpick into the head of the bait. Then I'm gonna put that Nico rig on the bottom and that hook right there. And this crawfish is literally gonna hop along the bottom like you see right there and end up being a very enticing, scintillating bait, right? Just looks good. The last way that I do it, and probably the most common way to do it, is if I am Carolina rigging a bait. And I have got a lot of baits on grass lakes throwing this Missile Baits D-Bomb Carolina rigged, right? And what I like to do with the Missile Baits Carolina rig is I like to insert that toothpick right there, and I love to fish this bait Carolina rigged through deep grass, because what this bait will do is it'll ride above the grass on the Carolina rig, and that toothpick giving it positive buoyancy, but it is a profile bait that literally will get smoked. You can also flip this bait with the toothpick in it, and it'll do a good job, but there's really not a better way in northern grass lakes to fish this bait than on a Carolina rig, right? The toothpick just adds positive buoyancy, and like I said, it is a cost saving. You don't have to go out and bulk buy a whole bunch of floating plastics. You don't have to change what you have. A toothpick is literally a fix that costs less than $1, and there's like 250 toothpicks in this. This will last me years, right? You can cut one toothpick with scissors, into a bunch of pieces like that, and you're going to get the same effectiveness out of it. We are all about saving money here at Bass Insights. We're working guys, right? We don't get to go spend $1 zillion on fishing tackle every year. We got to work with what we got, and we got to figure out ways to make that better, right? The toothpick is one way that you can do that. Guys, we hope you enjoyed learning stuff today, getting underwater, checking out the toothpick and how it can make your soft plastic games go to the next level. We just want to thank you for your time. The channel is really growing. In the comments, leave us a like, leave us a subscribe, turn that bell on, that notification, so when we post stuff, you guys are the first to know. We really want to thank you for your time. Give us a like, subscribe. We'll see you out there, everybody, next time.